Anybody who doesn't have a book? Oh, I got something I wanted to show you. You can take a close look at it to break if you like. You remember in reading Bill's story that we always read on the first page about him finding that gravestone in the Winchester Cathedral graveyard in London. I just happen to have a picture of it here, so if anybody'd like to see it. This has been restored twice. The last time was about 1936, and if you go there during a weekday, on a sunny day, you'll find the people from the businesses all around. You'll quite often find them sitting right by Thomas's gravestone, or even leaning up against it and eating their lunch. It's right in the middle of town. The regiment restores this, has restored it twice. It's been there for a long time. Thought you might, if you at the break, if you want to take a look at. This is the most famous gravestone in the whole world, of course. It's reported and translated in about 28 different languages and 40 million copies of the big book, so it's all over the place. 140 different countries. All right, on page 76, I believe last week, Marilyn covered the seventh step with you, right? Yeah. Okay. So today we're going to be starting in the middle of page 78. Before we get started with the reading, let's remember what's going on here. When we got through with our third step, you remember the big book told us we were going to have to face and be rid of the things in ourselves which have been blocking us from God. And that the first thing we had to do about that was find out what it was blocking us, and therefore we have the inventory of the fourth step to do, which is designed specifically for us to identify our defects of character and the insanities that drive us, and also to identify the people we've harmed so that we can see where our guilt and remorse and shame lie. We do that in our fourth step. And then in our fifth step, we admit all these things. And then we take these things to God in our seventh step, and we ask Him to remove these defects of character. And having done that, we're then ready to move on. Now, going back to the fourth step again, we were required in the fourth step to face so that we could be rid of the things in ourselves which were blocking us. And a very important part of that search has to do with our guilt. What are we guilty about? What did we do that caused us to be guilty and remorseful? And so, as we did our fourth step, remember, we also did our eighth-step list. And before we get started with the reading, let's remind ourselves about that. Take a look at page 70, please. At the bottom of page 70, 4 lines up from the bottom of the page, we have listed the people we have hurt by our conduct and are willing to straighten out the past if we can. That's pretty clear, isn't it? That this is part of the fourth step. You turn back one more page to 68 or 69. You look about 6-7 lines up from the bottom of page 69. We must be willing to make amends where we've done harm, provided that we do not bring about still more harm in so doing. And then if you look back even further on page 67, in the middle paragraph, 4 lines up from the bottom of the middle paragraph, when we saw our faults, we listed them, we placed them before us in black and white, we admitted our wrongs honestly, and were willing to set these matters straight. So it's pretty clear, isn't it, that in our fourth step, we accomplished the substantial bulk of our eighth step. Not only did we identify the people we've harmed, but at the same time, we became willing to make amends to them. This was a part of our fourth step. And now when we get to the eighth step, we're again looking at the list of people we've harmed, what we call our amends list. And it's going to carry us on into our 9th step. Now, the 8th step is ready to go as soon as we finish 5, 6, and 7, which normally we're going to do on one day. Immediately thereafter, we're ready to look at the 8th step, and we ought not to be delaying doing that. Because remember that our guilt is just as much a block from the sunlight of the Spirit as our defects. And so we need to take whatever action we can as soon as we can to be freed from our guilt, so that we can enter the world of the Spirit, so that we can have our spiritual awakening. As long as we sit with a lot of guilt on our heads, we're seriously blocked off, and we need to be set free from that. So we're going to go right ahead with our 8th step. Now, let's read the paragraph starting in the middle of page 76 and see what we have here, and then we'll discuss that a little bit, because there's a bit more to it than the book sets out. Now we need more action, without which we find that faith without works is dead. And we hear that 7 different times in the first 164 pages. It's a critically important thing for us to understand. Now, I think we've talked about it before, but exactly what does that mean? Faith without works is dead. What works? Well, I suppose the obvious is that we spread the faith, but then how do we do that? The 3rd step prayer gives us a good clue, where we ask God to take away our difficulties so that the victory He gives us over them may bear witness. In other words, make us an example to those we want to help of His power, God's power, and His love and His way of life working in and through us. So that one thing that we're going to be doing here in carrying the message is showing by our actions God's love and His power and His way of life working in and through us, so we can be helpful to others. But very probably this phrase refers most importantly to the fact that we not only have faith as a state of mind, but that we act upon it. In other words, I suppose the best definition there would be that faith without the action of faith is dead. Or in other words, trusting God, actively trusting God. It seems that until we are willing and able to actively trust God in all of our affairs, that the faith we profess has very little power with us, may be dead indeed. So faith without works is dead, and that refers to we need more action. Let's look at steps 8 and 9. We've a list of all persons we've harmed and to whom we are willing to make amends. Now, that means, does it not, that in essence the 8th step is done. Not only do we have the list, but we already have accomplished the willingness. Now that, again, was done back in the 4th step. We made it when we took inventory. We subjected ourselves to a drastic self-appraisal. Now we go out to our fellows and repair the damage done in the past. That's the 8th step, or the 9th step, isn't it? We attempt to sweep away the debris which has accumulated out of our effort to live on self-will and run the show ourselves. How many times have we seen this theme repeated, this business of self and selfishness and self-will and trying to play God? All the way back in the 3rd step, we found out that we'd been trying to play God and it didn't work. It was there in the 3rd step that we decided that hereafter, in this drama of life, God was going to be our director, the Father, and we be the child. So this is nothing new, but we're reminded constantly as we go through the big book that our problem is self. Remember, the book told us back on page 62, and we covered this extensively when we were there, that our troubles are of our own making, that they arise out of ourselves, and that alcoholics are extreme examples of self-will run riot, though we usually don't think so. And more importantly, that we have to be rid of self. We have to, or it'll kill us. And then most important of all, that we can't get rid of ourself on our own, but that God can and will if we let Him. So here we go again. We attempt to sweep away the debris which is accumulated out of our effort to live on self-will and run the show ourselves. That's a perfect illustration of what the Big Book was telling us back there on page 62. That is, all this debris is the direct result of decisions based on self that we took in the past, and actions which we took which were in the fulfillment of our selfish, self-centered aims, needs, and desires. And then, if we haven't the will to do this, we ask until it comes. This is a very important sentence, because it simply nullifies, negates, gives the lie to things that we find in other literature, which would seem to indicate or say flatly that we can put off our amends, that it really is just a matter of never saying never, that somehow or another there's this leeway that we can play around with. But there's only one solution to our unwillingness in the Big Book, and that solution is prayer. And it doesn't say, gee, golly whiz, it'd be kind of nice if you sort of prayed about this. It says we ask for the willingness when? Until it comes. Because we're not moving on until we're willing. Now, that's got to give us a clue as to how important our willingness to make amends is. Remember, it was agreed at the beginning we would go to any lengths for victory over alcohol. Let's examine for a moment how critically important this willingness to make amends really is. Right off the top, intellectually, without even reading the book, we would know that there are going to be some amends that we can never make, at least not in a direct fashion. And so the step tells us to make direct amends wherever possible, except when to do so would harm them or others. But there are other circumstances that which will militate against making direct amends. And people may be dead, they may have moved away, we may have lost touch with them. There are all kinds of reasons why we would not be able to make direct amends. So, if our life depends upon being set free from the guilt which has accumulated as a result of the harm we've done to others, and it does, and yet there are some amends we can never make, that would be one of those classic catch-22s. You got to make amends in order to live, but you can't make amends, so then you're going to die. But that's not the way the 12 steps work. There's nothing ever in the 12 steps which is a dead end like that, or a circular reasoning. So what's the answer? The answer is very simple. We will be set free from the guilt and remorse and shame arising out of our actions which harmed others, even though we can never make amends to them, so long as we are sincerely willing to make amends if we can. So you see how critical this business of willingness is? If I am truly willing to make amends, then I will be set free, even though I can't make those amends. And that's the only way it could work. Logically, we'd be at a dead end here, all of us, by the time we reach the ninth step, because we could never be set free from our guilt. But because that's the rule, that's the spiritual rule that applies here, it is the willingness then which becomes all important. That's why the Big Book says we pray for the willingness until it comes, because we must have the willingness in order to move forward. And any literature to the contrary notwithstanding, this is the rule, and when you think about it and follow it all the way through, it makes perfect sense. Some kind of a laissez-faire, comparative, New Age AA kind of stuff doesn't work. And you can easily see why, because it does not account for the basic facts. The basic facts are that we have to face and be rid of the stuff in ourselves which is blocking us in order to recover. Go back behind that, and why is that? Because we cannot stop drinking on our own. If we don't stop drinking, we're going to die. And how are we going to stop drinking? We're going to get God between us and the booze. And how are we going to get God between us and the booze? We're going to be set free from the things that block us from Him so that He can be there. Otherwise, we're in a heck of a place where we can't recover, because we don't have any protection. We don't have any power. We are powerless over alcohol. We're powerless over that next drink. We're powerless to stop ourselves from killing ourselves. And it's only through God's power that we are able to be set free. So anything that blocks us from God has to go. And this is going to be true now for the rest of our lives. We're going to have the 10th and 11th steps, where we're going to constantly monitor what's coming up with us, what's happening to us, what is our present reality, what's going on with me today, what is it that may be blocking me today, so that I can deal with it and be free of it, because without being in God's pocket, I'm a dead duck. And so the 8th step then is set out in that way. But there's a little bit more that we should consider, because practical experience teaches us that the 4th step and the 5th step may not pick up all of the amends that we need to make. The 4th step is pretty much of a rapier. It goes right to the point of the character defects. And sometimes there will be people who do not appear in our 4th step whom we have harmed. And we need to pick them up now in the 8th step. So one of the things we need to do is to sit down and go back through our lives and see if there's anybody who needs to be on that list who's not there. And quite often we will find that there is. The other thing that's very good to do, and this is not in the book, but I recommend it, just from having done this stuff for a long time. Sit down with your sponsor and figure out what amends you're going to make and write them down. Matter of fact, I recommend that you read the 9th step on pages 76 through 83. All the different categories of amends are laid out there, and figure out which ones are appropriate and are possible to be done in your situation. Then, with your sponsor, figure out what you're going to do and commit yourself to it. Write it down. And then get going and get it done. Those are the things which normally are going to be very helpful, which we don't find the instructions do that here in the big book, but practical experience shows us that's very important to do. Now then, we go down on page 76 again, the last partial paragraph, 6 lines up from the bottom of the page. Probably there are still some misgivings. As we look over the list of business acquaintances and friends we have hurt, we may feel diffident about going to some of them on a spiritual basis. Let us be reassured. To some people we need not and probably should not emphasize the spiritual feature on our first approach. We might prejudice them. There's some pretty good stuff there, but these next 3 lines are of extreme importance, and they're just here, and they're almost a non sequitur. They almost look like they're totally out of place. Why do these words appear here? I don't know. This is an inspired document. Bill wrote as he was inspired to write. Listen to this now. At the moment, and this is talking to the newcomer, because of course that's the newcomer was for whom the book was written. At the moment, we are trying to put our lives in order. But this is not an end in itself. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. Boy, does that ever nail it down. That's why we're here. That's our purpose. Do you ever stop and think about what that's really saying? My purpose in being here is not to feel good, not to be happy, joyous, and free, not to be free of alcohol, not to get back my business, my family, not to be reconstituted as a new human being or any of that stuff. My real purpose for being here is to fit myself to be of maximum service to God and the people about me. And the paradox is that when I do that, all the rest of my life straightens out. Maybe not the way I want it, but I will get what I need. And the problem there is, if I'm not going to get what I want, then why do this stuff? Well, because the alternative is to go on to bitter end. And most of us don't particularly want to do that either. You remember back in chapter 2, it told us that we have two alternatives. One's to go on to the bitter end, blocking out the intolerable past as best we can. And the other is to accept the spiritual way of life. See, we only have those two choices. People sit up here all the time and say, I got choices today. And I always want to ask them, what choices are those? What exactly do you mean, do you have choices? I can choose not to drink. Really? What about powerlessness? Did we forget about that somehow? I don't know. There's all so much screwy stuff going around these rooms these days. Of course, you know I'm an old alligator, and I'm really stuck in the big book rut. I admit it. Do you see what's happening here? This book is telling us we have a mission. We got a purpose in life. It was not willy-nilly that we just happened to be shoved in the doors of AA and offered this marvelous program of recovery. We're here for a reason. How many of us ever had a reason to be alive, a reason to live outside of survival and seeking pleasure? You are born, life is a bitch, and you die. And so what? But it's so much more than that, isn't it? We always thought it must be, or it might be, or we wished it could be, but we didn't have a clue about how to make it so. I love one of the new things in the military. As you guys know, I was Marines, but it was a long time ago, and we didn't have some of this stuff. But now the commander will be told what needs to be done, and he'll turn to his subordinates and say, "Make it so." Yes, sir. That's the entire instruction. Make it so. Well, make it so here. What we're going to do then is we're going to concentrate on fitting ourselves for our new role in life. Now, a lot of people coming in new are not wanting at all to accept this because they're looking for somebody to save their little behinds. They want to be restored to sanity and not have to drink anymore, or at least not suffer the horrible consequences of drinking. But what is all of this other stuff? What's this stuff about God and inventory and sitting down and explaining myself to some other person and making amends and then praying all the time and meditating and taking inventory and going to meetings? Holy cow, what's the matter with you people? Can't you just live your lives? No, we can't. Not that way. We just can't. And we've had to find that out for ourselves, and perhaps you will too if you hang around long enough. And so what's happening here is that as we work the steps, the result of working the steps will be, if we follow directions, will be that we fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. What's the 12th step tell us? Having had a spiritual awakening, as the result, what? Of these steps, you see, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. So what's happened to us is that we have, by working the steps, become fit to carry this message, to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. And all of our prayers lead us right back to exactly that same objective. Bill Wilson called this our holy mission. That was his phrase. He was convinced that God brought us in here for the sole purpose of having us become so cleared away of the things that block us from Him that we will be able to be effective messengers and carry His message. And perhaps that's so. That seems to be what this book is telling us right here. At any rate, the idea that going out and making amends and that we should walk in and say, "Hey Joe, I'm sorry about the things I did to you. But you got to understand, I got religion now. I'm very spiritual now. I'm on a spiritual path now, and I've changed and all that. And so we'll just not worry about what I did to you before, because look at me. Don't you see all this wonderful progress in me? I'm so spiritual now." That ain't going to work very well, maybe part of the time, but a lot of people are going to be pretty sure to look at us askance and say, "Yeah, I've heard stuff like that from you before. I remember the time you got baptized, you told me everything was going to be just fine after that. I remember the time you became a member of that church or that religious sect, or you started going to an ashram, or you're over here doing your thing with karate, and all these things are going to straighten you out. And then I remember the time you came to me and said, everything's going to be just fine now because I'm getting hypnosis and acupuncture. And I started taking all of these herbs." Or remember the time you came to me and said, "Well, I've got my own personal trainer now who is also a Swami. So everything's going to be fine. I'm going to stop doing these terrible things." Well, now we go to him and we're very careful about how we pronounce ourselves to be newly minted spiritual beings, because we might prejudice him. At the moment, we're trying to put our lives in order, but this is not an end in itself. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. It is seldom wise to approach an individual who still smarts from our injustice to him and announce that we have gone religious. In the prize ring, this would be called leading with the chin. Why lay ourselves open to being branded fanatics or religious bores? We may kill a future opportunity to carry a beneficial message, but our man is sure to be impressed with a sincere desire to set right the wrong. See, now, that little sentence gives us the clue to what's going on here. We're not there to apologize. We're there to set right the wrong, if we can. So our effort has to be in that direction, rather than simply another apology. And it's also really important to understand that it is irrelevant whether we are forgiven by them or not. We're not there for forgiveness. We're there to right a wrong. We're there to do what we can to set matters straight. We're not always going to be possible to do that. There's some things that we can never right. But we need to be willing to do so if we can. Our man is sure to be impressed with a sincere desire to set right the wrong. He is going to be more interested in a demonstration of goodwill than in our talk of spiritual discoveries. And so, you see, what we need to avoid there is coming off sounding as though we are making a plea right up front for forgiveness, for understanding, and on the basis that we used to be spiritually bankrupt. We were godless, we were atheists, we were agnostic, any of those things. But now, look at me, now I've got spirituality, now I'm a good guy. And in most cases, that ain't going to work very well. And usually when we find ourselves doing that, we're really begging. We're begging to be understood, we're begging to be forgiven. We are looking to be shriven by the people we've harmed. We don't understand that that's not the point. The point is to be set free from our guilt. And to do that, it's necessary for us to make a sincere attempt to set matters straight. That's what we're supposed to be doing, and that's what will work for us. The middle paragraph, starting right in the middle of the page. We don't use this as an excuse for shying away from the subject of God. When it will serve any good purpose, we're willing to announce our convictions with tact and common sense. Excuse me. Now let's see, there's a sentence, there's a paragraph back here on page 68 that kind of goes along the same line. Let's take a look at that. The third full paragraph on page 68. We never apologize to anyone for depending upon our Creator. We can laugh at those who think spirituality the way of weakness. Paradoxically, it is the way of strength. The verdict of the ages is that faith means courage. All men of faith have courage. They trust their God. We never apologize for God. Instead, we let Him demonstrate through us what He can do. Now, it's quite clear that the Big Book never says to us, don't talk about God. You might scare somebody off. That's a bunch of balderdash. And when we're telling people how we have recovered, how crazy it would be to try to explain recovery to them, the method of recovery we use, the program of recovery, without giving credit to God for what has been done in our lives. And so, of course, that particular notion is something that just floats around out there in limbo and doesn't have anything to do with the Big Book or AA. This next sentence really tells us what is our first priority amends. The question of how to approach the man we hated will arise. Now please notice that it says in the past tense, hated. And why would that be? Why aren't we talking about making amends to the man we hate? Well, hatred has gone by the boards, hasn't it? See, remember what we learned about the 4-step? That if we have any resentments or hatred or anger left, we didn't do it right. So while we were in our 4-step, we learned how to be set free from our resentments and our hatreds. And so now when we get to our 9th step, we're looking at making amends to people we at one time hated. And usually hatred goes both ways, and usually there's a good reason both ways. So we have found that not only did we have hatred for this person, but that we had harmed this person in some way, and we need to make amends, even though it's quite clear that this person did some really rotten things to us. Now, if you're sponsoring people, or if you're paying attention to yourself when you reach the 9th step, be aware that if there is a reluctance or a holding back to make amends, a balking, at making amends to somebody, there's a very good chance that that person was not set free from us because we did not forgive the wrongs they did. We're still hanging on to them. And now what we're really saying is, why in the hell should I make amends to him? Look what he did to me. And unfortunately, in our human solutions out there, so much is made of the harm that was done to us as an excuse or a rationale or reason for our own crapped out behavior, that we would love to believe that all these things are true. We're not responsible. It's what's been done to us. It's the harm that others did to us, the trauma that we suffered, that these are the reasons for our behavior, for the things that we've done that we knew at the time we were doing them were wrong. And so now the same kind of a specter raises its ugly head and says, why should I make amends to him? Look what he did to me. We have to put that aside. Because that's a killer. And if you see that coming up in yourself, be aware of what's happening. If you're sponsoring somebody and you see that, you know that it's a balking because there's been no forgiveness. We're going to have to go back and ask God for the willingness to forgive the wrongs that were done. Because we have to be set free from that. Those are terrible blocks to our spiritual growth. And to walk around with hatred of anybody is a very serious problem for us. Remember, we learned in that little story in the back of the book that what we do is, by the way, if you don't know about it, it's on page 552, that what we do is we pray for the people we hated. And even if we don't want to, and our prayers are only words and we don't mean it, we do it anyway. We do it for a couple of weeks. And if we do that, asking God to give that person everything we would want for ourselves, what happens is that we find we've come to mean it, and that the hatred is replaced with love. Now, I guess it must be axiomatic that we cannot pray for somebody and at the same time hang on to hatred for them. The anger will be replaced as a result of the prayers. And it may take a while, but it will happen. So in other words, when we're balking and making amends to somebody who has harmed us, let's look to see if we have completed our steps with respect to that person, whether we have in fact been willing to forgive what they did. And we can pretty well understand that we have not forgiven, because otherwise we would not balk at making the amends. The question of how to approach the man we hated will arise. It may be he has done us more harm than we've done him, and though we may have acquired a better attitude toward him, we are still not too keen about admitting our faults. Nevertheless, with a person we dislike, we take the bit in our teeth. This may take some prayer, by the way. This may take some prayer and asking for the willingness and asking for the power to do it. It is harder to go to an enemy than to a friend, but we find it much more beneficial to us. We go to him in a helpful and forgiving spirit. Notice the forgiving here, because this is critical. Confessing our former ill feeling and expressing our regret. Now, I think it's significant that this is the first amends listed in the ninth step. There are 5 categories of amends listed in the ninth step in the big book. You won't find them anywhere else. Those 5 categories are, first, what we just read, the person we hated. The second category is money that we owe. The third is crimes we've committed. The fourth is infidelities that we've committed. And the fifth is amends to family. Now, those 5 categories of amends are all laid out here from pages 77 through 93. And one of the things that it's important to do before setting out to make amends is to study those pages and recognize how the directions here in the big book fit into each of our personal stories and our personal needs. Now we've got some kind of special rules that apply to making amends, to working the ninth step. Rules which in effect express paradoxes. And they go directly contrary to what we probably have learned growing up. We're going, yes?
Reason they should be done in that order?
No.
One, the person we hate, and two,
No. No. It just happens that's the way it came out. Now you know how I think about the book. I think of it in terms of being an inspired document. And my feeling about it, I could never in a million years prove it. But it was Bill was writing, his first inspiration was to write down the person we hated. Now I can rationalize that for myself, saying, man, those are the tough ones. If we can get past that, we can handle anything. And that's the way I look at it. But I did not mean to imply that these were set out in a specific order, that we had to follow that order. That answer your question? Okay. Any other questions about that? Yes?
Jim, I'm an alcoholic. My name's Craig. How would I be able to make an amends to an individual that I've determined was basically a toxic person in my life, maybe abusive or so on, or someone that I was in a business relationship with years ago that I really don't want to continue even having some form of a communicative relationship with him. You know, maybe that if I would even start this type of an amends to him, it would open a door maybe for some form of a, you know, I just would not want to get in any sort of form of relationship with him after this.
Well, it means you're scared.
I,
Okay.
yeah.
What do you mean by toxic?
He was just the kind of person that was abusive, manipulative.
If you see him, he's going to do what to you?
I would think that I don't want to get into. We had a relationship where, you know, we basically had, you know, there was communication, and I'm almost at a point where I'm better off, I feel, not communicating with them.
Well, what you really mean is that you're afraid of confrontation with him.
Very well put.
So that's something you pray about. You ask God to take away that fear. You plan out your strategy. You waylay him in an alley and you tell him what's going on, how the cow ate the cabbage in about 3 minutes or less, and then you disappear. Because all you care about doing here is being set free from the guilt or whatever it is you feel. It's probably a whole lot more than guilt. And I would suggest to you that the guilt, of course, is a product of fear, but there's a lot more fear involved here than guilt. But anyway, you need to slay that dragon, all right, but you need to do that with some help from God. And the help you need is to get over your fear of confronting this guy. I would suggest strongly to you quit using the word toxic because it doesn't apply here. There's no toxicity involved. You're not going to be rubbing up against him long enough to get infected.
Because I wanted to ask this and I wasn't. I think my sponsor. I've done like some of I've done my 9th step, but there's my ex-sister-in-law. Really hard. I have to. When my mother passed away in August.
Okay, now I just want to tell you the meter's running now.
When my mom passed away, I was in the hospital room with my ex-sister-in-law. There's a lot of uncomfortability.
Yeah.
She's very angry at my brother who divorced her. But we've also had some problems, you know, in the past when she went to my parents said I was high, you know, just, you know, stuff like that. When I was in jail, I allowed her to take my daughter, with her daughter, to go to some play. And I prayed. They said to pray for a week for her, and I did that. But I guess it's similar to what he's asking. It's maybe fear. I have to do my 9th step with her.
Yep. That's it.
I'm uncomfortable around her.
Sure. Well, you probably find that you're afraid of confrontation anyway. And the only time that you're willing to confront is when you get mad. So if you get mad enough at her, you can go make amends to her. Because you won't be afraid. Now, I don't mean to make light of it, because it's a real problem. but it's not an insoluble problem. You write it all down, exactly what's going on with you, and then you ask God for help with it. That'll work.
I don't hate her.
I know you
I
don't.
think that she's sick also.
Yeah, well,
But
it's
I
never
guess I'm
pleasant. It's never pleasant to have to confront sick people. I know a bunch of goofy people. I don't have any. I have no pleasure having to even be around them. But then sometimes we have to do that, you know.
just for ourselves.
There's some real goofballs out there.
Thanks.
Present company accepted. Yes.
Hi, Jim. Thank you for the meeting. My name is sharing this in case anybody else is having this problem, because I did. And I always think when I have a problem, something really terribly wrong with me. And what the problem was, I had someone on my list that I had to make the amend to. And I was told to pray every day, and I did pray every day. And I made the amend. And I continued to do my steps. I had to pray for 5 years, every day, before there was a lifting of that terrible feeling that I had. And my sponsor said that was okay, that's okay. And finally, the only way I could get rid of it, and I'm saying this just because it relieved me and helped anybody else, I wrote a letter. I put every single thing in the letter. I burned the letter, and I did a burial at sea. And that was the end. Once in a while I get a little twinge, but that was the end. And it took a while. So for anybody who's thinking they should be finished in a week, sometimes it just doesn't happen that way.
Well, that's pretty interesting. That's almost witchcraft. You know, you burned them to death, and then you drowned them.
Sounds good to me.
You practice Santeria, do you?
No, but that worked.
Cut the heads off of chickens. But it worked.
It worked.
So if you got one of those, then you write a letter about them, and you burn them up, and then you bury the ashes at sea, and you'll be all right.
Did it for me.
I'm not making fun. I think it's wonderful. Anything around here that works, you know. Your sponsor got a whole lot of faith telling you that 5 years is okay. I mean, it's like, I guess the same faith it takes to get a 30-year mortgage on a house, and then we go around talking about one day at a time.
Well, St. Augustine's mother prayed for 35 years, right? For him to get on track.
Sure.
Remember, so, time is not the important thing, it's the effort, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
The authority, so I think that's
Yeah.
good.
Well, 43 years doesn't make a whole lot of difference, you know. 44th year is the hardest, I told you that. Yes, dear.
I've been struggling with this make amends. My daughter, who was my dearest, stopped talking to me about 5 or 6 years ago for reasons I've never known. I wrote her, I called her, she would never tell me what happened. I desperately miss my grandchildren. So last week I picked up the phone and I called my granddaughter. And she was so happy to hear from me. I just, I'm like this. And I asked her if she could come see me over Easter. And she said she'd have to talk to her mother. So I don't know what's going, but I didn't do anything to this child to make her stop talking to me. I don't want to make her mad. I don't like her. I don't think I have to like her. Because I don't think anybody should be so cruel as to completely cut off a relationship with someone who loved them. And I've been sober a long time. I was sober when this happened. And it's very upsetting. I want my granddaughter. I don't want my daughter.
Well, get her to bring the kid, and then you tell her to get lost. But a lot of times, I guess we have to take the good in order to get the bad in order to get the good, don't we? But it's strange. The bad feelings probably go both ways, and somewhere along the line, if you can break that chain of bad feelings, it seems to solve the whole problem. Maybe that's something we have to do.
Except that over these years of writing to her and asking her to tell me what happened so we could talk, or calling her and asking her to never hang up on me, I don't know what else I can do.
I think that we're in a situation, all of us, where we have to recognize that any human problem at all, any human problem, is amenable to God's power. And there may be something that we can do to invoke His power in any situation. That might be true here. I'm not going to preach to your choir, honey. You've been around too long. But you know the power of prayer. And you know what can happen there. And maybe this is the time that we back out of it and let God have the problem. We have a hand in the back there. Or you were doing your knitting, weren't you?
Right. I'm doing
You keep pulling those threads up.
socks I'm working on.
You got me every week. You get me with that.
Yeah, I do.
Any other comments, questions, sharing? Okay, let's go on now. This last partial paragraph, bottom page 77 and at top of page 78, gives us some general instructions here. There's quite a bit of stuff going on in Ninth Step which is outside of our normal experience. So under no condition do we criticize such a person or argue, which we would love to do. And in many instances, they've been really rotten, mean, nasty to us. They've harmed us a lot. And yet, this big book is saying, you don't dare say a word about that. Because what they did to you is irrelevant. The only thing that's relevant here is what you did, which you need to be set free from. Simply, we tell them that we will never get over drinking until we have done our utmost to straighten out the past. We are there to sweep off our side of the street, realizing that nothing worthwhile can be accomplished until we do so, never trying to tell him what he should do. We've given up entirely now any pretext that because of the things he's done to us, we have a right to make him wrong. Now, all of our bright-eyed friends would tell us, well, you ought to go tell him just exactly how he gets off, what he did to you. No, we don't do that here. You might want to save that for another time. But right here, when we're making amends, his faults are not discussed at all, even though we would love to blast him. And maybe we got a lot of big-time ammunition. We'd like to pull out the big guns and really get after him, but we don't do it. His faults are not discussed. We stick to our own. If our manner is calm, frank, and open, we will be gratified with the result. Now, that's going to be quite true, as a matter of fact. These amends are almost magical, because so much of the time when we're making amends and we think that nothing good could come out of it, we find that much good comes out. There's another thing that we're keeping in mind here, and there's a kind of a general rule which we're faced with right here. And that general rule is that we don't make other people wrong. If I make you wrong and I don't have permission to do so, then I'm wrong. I can justify it. I can say it was for your own good, for your benefit. I hear all the time this stuff around, if you excuse this expression, I know it's not kosher in this room, but he called me on my shit, as if that was some kind of a good thing. He practiced tough love, as if that was some kind of a good thing, instead of being an oxymoron, which is exactly what tough love is. The question here is, did I have a right to criticize you and tell you where you were wrong because you had invited me to do so? Did I have permission? Or was I a volunteer? Did I walk up to you and say, Audrey, I know what's wrong with you. Now sit down and listen. I'm going to tell you everything that's wrong with you. Now, Audrey, being the kind of woman she is, would probably beat me over the head with a big book just to start with. She sure as heck isn't going to sit there and listen to me decide to tell her what's wrong with her. Now, I don't blame her. See, here's the problem with that. I come up to you and I start to tell you what's wrong with you, and if you haven't given me permission to do so, the wall comes down. You stop listening. If I had any reasonable expectation of being helpful to you, it's gone. But more so than that, I have demeaned myself, because the real motive behind this is I want to make myself feel better. By comparison, after all, if I can say Audrey's wrong, that means I got to be right. So my purpose is to be right, not to help Audrey. I don't even think about it that way, but that's exactly what's going on. I have demeaned myself. Now then, on the other hand, if I am given permission, then I speak my mind. I say exactly what I believe to be so. Try to do it with some kind of love and empathy for the other person. But nevertheless, there are times when we need somebody in our lives who will help us see things straight, put them in perspective. But we need to be open to hear that and to be willing to accept what we hear, at least for the purposes of considering it, to see if we can feel it's right or wrong. But that doesn't happen when we gratuitously attack others with our superior intellect, our superior knowledge of the program, and our superior spirituality and morality, because that's often exactly what happens. So we don't make other people wrong. We will try to help them if they ask for help. There's a big difference. In 9 cases out of 10, the unexpected happens. Sometimes the man we are calling upon admits his own fault. So feuds of years standing melt away in an hour. Rarely do we fail to make satisfying progress. Our former enemies sometimes praise what we're doing and wish us well. Occasionally they will offer assistance. It should not matter, however, if someone does throw us out of his office. We've made our demonstration, done our part. It's water over the dam. You see, there's the real McCoy. The fact of making the amends may not have had any salutary effect on the other person whatsoever. It might even have made them really mad that we should even have the temerity to walk into their home and talk to them. And we're sorry if that happens. But our real purpose for being there was to be set free from the guilt, which is a direct result of the harm that we'd done them. And so that we accomplish. We make the amends, the guilt is gone, and we can move on. Did you have a question? Okay. Also, in making amends, we must be very careful not to do anything which will harm another person, the person to whom we're making amends, or anyone else. Now, some people misread the 9th step to mean that we're not to do anything that would harm us. That's not what it says. Well, that's a pretty nice rationalization, isn't it? Gee, I don't have to make any amends at all, because I got to tell you that every one of these things is going to really hurt me. No, we're not permitted to harm another person. Now, that's a general spiritual principle, isn't it? This is not something which is limited to the 9th step. As a matter of fact, it's a very powerful spiritual principle that we are not permitted to do anything to harm another person deliberately. There's a corollary to that, by the way, which isn't often spoken of, and that corollary is that we're not permitted to allow anybody else to harm us. Think about it for a second. If I'm being harmed, the natural result of that is that I will be blocked off from God. So I'm not going to permit you to harm me. I'm going to say, stop right there. And I'm going to mean it. No, 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 we'll have none of this. If you don't stop, I'm going to get away from you. And you may not see me again. Because it is absolutely imperative that I follow through on the mission which I've been given. This doesn't make me any kind of a hero or set me apart from other human beings. It just means that I have a purpose here, which is to fit myself to be of maximum service to God and the people about me. And the person who wishes to pick on me, be damned. I'm not going to have that. And there are a lot of people in our lives that we drag along with us as we're going through life, and then we walk through that door and they're still out there somewhere in the parking lot following us around, waiting to pounce on us. Now, all this is figurative, of course, but they're out there. And it's not at all unusual for especially people who are coming in fairly new. They've got a lot of that kind of baggage hanging out there. And those people, though they are not necessarily trying to do anything to be harmful, can be very harmful because it has been their habit to control, to abuse, to cause dependency and to maintain dependency. There's all kinds of harm that can be done. They're still carrying stories. They're gossiping. All kinds of things that can be harmful to the new person, and even to those of us who've been around for a while. You run into these kinds of people once in a while, and I still tell them the same thing: knock it off, bud. And I mean it. So we don't allow other people to harm us. And sometimes we can't stop them, so we have to get away from them. And that may seem like a harsh remedy, but it's absolutely necessary. Sometimes it requires of us that we make some hard decisions about our lives and the way we live our lives and who we allow in our lives. But nevertheless, we must do that. Okay, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We've got the money thing coming up next. So we're not trying to handle that today. And next week we'll get into money and crimes and infidelity and probably family. Maybe we'll finish up the 9th step next time. I don't think so, though. We go pretty slow around here. Nobody seems to mind that too much. Anybody have anything they'd like to ask or share or anything before we close this out? Yes, dear.
I hate to keep on this, but it's bothering me so. You say we shouldn't let other people harm us.
Absolutely.
She's harming me by not letting me see my grandchildren.
Well,
So I've got to keep on trying with them.
sometimes there are things that we can't do anything about.
That's what I'm afraid of.
So the choice has to be, am I going to see my grandkids or not? And if I can only see my grandkids and my daughter's going to be there, then that's the way it has to be. That's the choice. And we have a lot of tough choices to make in life, as you well know. I know you've made plenty of them. It's just another one. However, for the daughter who was still giving me a bad time, I'd make it very clear we'll have none of this. Now, I don't know how far you can go with that. But it's very, very important for you not to allow yourself to be blocked from God, because we don't want to lose you. And that can happen. There's always got to be room for God in your soul, in your spirit. Yes, in the back.
I'm really glad to be here today. I apologize for coming in late, but I called about 2:15, and I knew that I could catch the second half of the meeting. I'm visiting from New York. I was vacationing with my family and stuff. I'm got a home group in New York, and got a flyer here for the AA's 68th birthday from New York Intergroup. I'd like to leave.
Oh, good.
Sunday, June 29th. If you'd, there's a couple extras. I know this is a clubhouse and other groups meet here. If you have a secretary or something, you can distribute them. There's a form here if you would like to be nominated as a speaker. Just take a couple of those too. And, it's good to be here. Thanks.
Well, good. Thanks a lot.
If you're closing up this one.
Yeah, we got to do the. If you don't want you to go away mad now, if you got an irresistible impulse, speak up.
Fine, thank you.
Okay. Who's willing to do the chips today? We've got some people who want to pick up chips. Jerry?
I'm not about
Well, all right. That's a good idea.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm an alcoholic. We have a chip system here in South Florida, and the white chip denotes giving up and surrendering to a new way of life. Does anyone want to pick up a white chip? Tatiana. Tatiana.
Hi, everybody.
And I guess I should know this, but I don't. This is 90 days?
Oh, I don't know.
Okay, red is for 90 days. Anyone have 90 days? And blue is for 6 months. No? No takers? Well, if you haven't had a drink today, give yourselves and your higher power a hand.
Okay, guys, let's close the meeting. Okie dokie. Well, the joke maven has honored me, blessed me with another joke. So I'm going to try it out on you. Now, this particular maven has a wonderful supply of lawyer jokes. And as you know, I'm a lawyer, so I don't have any problem telling them myself. It seems that there was a bus traveling down the highway, and it had a bunch of lawyers in it. And this bus went around a curve and didn't make it. Went right off the edge and over the precipice. But there were a lot of people who were very unhappy about this. You might be able to guess why. There were 4 empty seats on the bus. The other joke along that same genre, of course, is what do you call a busload of lawyers that went off the cliff and all got killed? A good start. Oh, my maven told me another story too. I'm going to tell you this one.
Why am I anonymous today?
You're what?
Why am I anonymous? You give me credit.
She likes the credit.
Well, I thought you'd probably beat me around the head and shoulders if I broke your anonymity here. Audrey the Maven. Okay, it seems that this guy was at a golf course and he was teeing off and he hit the ball and it went up and it went from his fairway over to the next fairway, flew across some trees and conked this guy in the head. And the guy that got conked turned out to be a lawyer. So the fellow hit the ball, went over there, and he was looking to see, and this lawyer kind of stood up, and he said, you hit me with your ball. He said, it's going to cost you $5,000. The guy hit the ball, said, I said 4. He said, I'll take it. Okay, we have a secretary here. Her name is Sarah, and you have something you'd like to say to us? Did we make rent?
Hi, I'm Sarah, and I'm your secretary, and I am an alcoholic.
Okay.
No, we're $4 short, and not only that, but we have coffee and supplies to pay for.
All right, come on, ante up, guys. We need some more dough in here. And what you got to do is you got to get more people coming to this meeting, so we get some money ahead.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Just bring your friends.